I went on my first expedition in August 2000, and since then I've started studying anthropology and archaeology. In 2001, while searching the area near the mouth of Freshwater Creek, I came across a small ceramic vessel embedded in the mud. It was interesting when we tested the vessel in a bathtub to see if it could float. No matter how we positioned it in the water, it always tipped, filled with water and sank. This means that the vessel, there was no way it could have floated in as independent flotsam, but would have had to come in on another vessel or drop by a person and sat where we found it. The other artefact that we have was found by my mother, Judith Purcell, on Lamb Island roughly 20 years ago. And this artefact is a bronze walking stick head. This bronze head was actually found on the northern tip of Lamb Island, which in fact isn't that far from the position on Stradbroke Island where the Galleon is believed to be wrecked. It is a known fact that the Aborigines between the Moreton Bay Islands did interact with each other. The bronze walking stick head was taken to a Spanish exhibition at the Brisbane Museum, and a professional there took the head and dated it to be roughly around 16th century. And it was here that the Spanish professional confirmed that it was a walking stick head and it was definitely Spanish. How this bronze walking stick head came to be buried on Lamb Island where it was dug up is a matter for speculation, but it is, however, possible that it did wash in on a Spanish galleon 400 years ago and was taken to Lamb Island by the tribal Aboriginals. That is just one of many less romantic possibilities.
The story I heard from Stephen Miles about Fraser Brown, who was a real local character on Straddy. Fraser told Stephen that he, with a couple of his mates, went down to look for the Galleon probably in the 1960s or 50s, and Fraser told Stephen that they found it after going through some really spooky country, and that they dug out of the Galleon a bell and some coins. Stephen said a chest full of coins, but anyway, some coins. And they were carrying them back to Dunwich, which is where Fraser lived, and they got too heavy, so they buried the bell and the coins in the sand, and then, continued on their way home. Okay, they came back later because Fraser was a horse rider, so they came back with horses later to look for the bell and the coins, and they couldn't find where they buried them. Now, that's a pretty interesting story in itself, but what comes up even more interesting is that a few months ago I came in contact with a woman whose husband was a bulldozer driver in the 70s for the sand mining company, and he was putting in a new road through the centre of Straddy, about 5 miles south of Dunwich, and he was dozing along the side of Mount Corrie, and the blade of the bulldozer turned up a brass bell, which he pulled out of the ground and took home and showed his wife. Now, I saw this bell a couple of weeks ago, and I've taken photos of it. I've sent those photos to a guy in California, an archaeologist, who is one of his things is he's studied Spanish bells, because there's a lot of them in California, and it's his opinion that it's very probably a Spanish bell. In 2002, by a series of coincidences, my research turned up some very interesting new pieces of information. On a trip back from Stradbroke, I sat in the water taxi next to the local history librarian, and she told me about a guy called Alan Rogers, who is a guy who grew up in Cleveland, now in his late 60s and retired, and who became very interested in the story of the Galleon in the 1990s and pulled together quite a lot of information through his local contacts. I met with Alan, who coincidentally only lives a few hundred metres from my place, and we exchanged stories and information. And it's interesting when you intermash your different bits of information, there's always little things that you've got that he hasn't got and that he had that I didn't know about, so it was quite an interesting meeting. Alan told me about a guy called Duncan McPhee, who'd been looking for the Galleon for a lot of years, I think since he was 12, certainly seriously since the 1960s. And through Alan Rogers, I was able to contact Duncan, and we met, and we were able to exchange information too. And again, this thing happened where he had bits of information that I didn't have, and I had bits of information that he didn't have. So we're getting more pieces of the jigsaw puzzle being put together, and it, as often happens, it raises a lot more questions than it answers, in fact, because we've now got the possibility of 2 wrecks in the swamp, where we used to think there was only one, and that makes it a very interesting story indeed. 2 very interesting pieces of information which Duncan had, which I'd never come across. One was the actual written account by a Jim Walker who found the wreck site in the 1930s, and this is really important because it's an eyewitness account that's recorded by the eyewitness in written form. This goes like this. The winter of the following year, 1934, was a dry one, and the fire went up the island from Swan Bay almost to Blue Lagoon. We decided to have another go at looking for the Galleon. By following the previous tracks, most of the swamp was negotiable. Still a lot of marshy ground and odd stretches of water. We were able to zigzag working eastward. We had no idea what we were looking for, and visibility was very limited. At about 3 p.m. we found it, well over half a mile from the edge of the swamp. There still seemed to be a couple of 100 yards to the dunes, indicating proximity to the ocean beach. The remains seemed to be laying roughly north-south. We came across a southern vertical about 5 feet high sticking out of the swamp. It could have been part of a stern post assembly. A few yards further along, another piece protruding from the sand might have been a portion of treble laminated rib. It was close to here that the broken rivet was found. There was no sign of keel, keelson, garboard, strakes, rib rockers, etc. These, being heavy, could have sunk into the swamp or long ago been covered by blown sand. About 30 yards along, there were other odd bits of standing timber, about 3 to 4 feet. The whole had obviously been burned over many times. The remains were embedded in a massive network of fibrous roots. We chipped off a small section of charcoal. The timber seemed to be a type of oak. Okay, the other important piece of information which Duncan McPhee supplied was the account of a man called Boy Young, who's actually a doctor, Dr. Boy Young, who found the wreck site in, again, the 1930s, probably 1934. Yeah, so Dr. Young found the wreck site in probably 1934. He was a member of the Rover Scouts, and as a exercise, these guys came over looking for the wreck on the basis of Dr. Young's father's account of there being a wreck in the swamp. So they came and they found the wreck site, and Dr. Young retrieved from the wreck a old dirk, which is like a utilitarian tool that sailors used. Now, according to Dr. Young's son, other members of the group retrieved other items, including coins. Now, we were fortunate enough to make contact with Dr. Young's son, Edwin Young, and he had the dirk still in very good condition.
Went to the Galleon in the swamp. The Galleon in the swamp, it was known as, in 1933 or 34. And when he was in the Rover Scouts, and I was just roaming around the place on some scouting excursion, and came upon this sort of skeletal remains of this wooden boat. And so some of the people there collected bits and pieces. He collected that. A couple of other people got bits of bolts, and someone found some rather coin or two of no great value, but bits and pieces, which they carted off, probably like hundreds of other people might have done. And stripped the thing. But it wasn't all exposed. Part of it was all, parts of it was sticking out of the sand and others were not. And so he had this knife, which was under the house, covered with rust, which I knocked off.
Did he say where he actually found it? Was it on the vessel or on the ground?
It was somewhere within the, near the actual remains that they found.
And do you know if they actually found the vessel just by chance, or if they were following some instructions and looking for it when they found it?
No, he didn't know about it. They just came across it. But later on, when speaking to his father had heard about it from other people about many years previously. Was able to say, "Oh, that's the, did you know about that?" That's
and do you recall him saying anything that gives you any idea where it was, where they actually were when they found it?
I only remember something about a swamp.
Right.
And somewhere over on Stradbroke Island.
Yep.
And that's Jim Walker stuff.
Yeah, we've got Jim Walker's letter typed form, but it'd be really interesting to have it
Possibly the same as
Yeah, just to have it in his original handwriting.
So finally we had actually held an object off the galleon in our hands. Or had we? Jim Walker came across from the middle beacon at the latitude of Kuriyaba. He did the whole trip in one day and found the galleon at about 3 p.m. That would put him about here. Boy Young took Duncan McPhee to the site of his finding of the Dirk, here. That is 4 miles further north. There is no way that Jim Walker went east from the middle beacon and arrived that far north at 3 p.m. on the same day. Both accounts are reliable eyewitness accounts. The logical conclusion is that one of them does not relate to the galleon described by Isabel Hannah and the Aborigines, but one of them almost certainly does. Then there is this map. It is a road map from 1934. Marked on it, in the 18-mile swamp, is an item noted as Spanish Galleon. The location is almost exactly where Boy Young found the dirt. All the evidence points to the presence of 2 wrecks in the southern part of the 18-mile swamp. One of them was seen at the end of the 19th century, and it appeared to have a high poop and forecastle. Was it a Spanish galleon?